seconds, but I managed to get my hands and fingers to work together to take the flowers from his hand. "Thanks," I said, but it came out as a choked whisper. Malachi's brows lowered and concern flashed in his eyes before he turned back to Diane. "I'd like to introduce my host father." He gestured toward the front steps. Raphael, dressed in khakis and a sweater, stepped into the entryway and held out his hand. "Ms. Jeffries, I'm John Raphael. Thank you so much for inviting us to dinner. I was so pleased to hear Malachi had already made a friend." As he smiled, his face transformed from forgettable to indelible, from ordinary to, well, angelic. Whenever Raphael smiled, I wished I had my camera to capture it. The tension melted from Diane's body as she shook Raphael's hand. Her face relaxed into a warm smile. "I was happy too, for Lela," she said, which nearly made me laugh, because we'd had a raging argument this afternoon about whether I could go out with Malachi tonight. It was the first time I'd ever asked to go out with a boy. The first time I'd ever mentioned one, actually, and judging by the way she'd clutched at her chest when I did, it really caught her by surprise, especially because things had been so miserable since Nadia killed herself. Diane couldn't understand how I'd snapped out of my grief in the past week. She didn't know I'd followed Nadia into death, that I'd seen my best friend again, that I not only suspected Nadia was in a better place, I knew it at a bone-deep level. I'd made sure of it, in fact. I'd sold my own freedom to make it happen. While Diane and Raphael chatted about the joys of parenting teenagers, I went to the kitchen with the flowers, staring at those thinly veined buds as my throat tightened. I opened a cabinet to pull out a plastic vase, and when I closed it, Malachi was standing beside me. "You don't like them?" he asked. I shook my head. "I love them. It's just, no one's ever given me flowers before." I turned my back, rolling the delicate stems between my fingers. It was one of those cheap grocery store bouquets. Tegan, the new queen bee of Warwick High School since Nadia's death, would have scoffed at the already wilting necks, the scraggly little petals. But to me, Malachi's fingers skimmed along my shoulder. "I have never given a girl flowers before." He laughed quietly. "I hadn't actually seen a flower up close in a long time." He'd spent the last several decades in a walled city of cement and steel and slime, where the only things that grew were the festering wishes of the dead, sorrowful people trapped there. Because it was always dusk or midnight, never day, nothing green or lush or real could grow. Well, that wasn't exactly true. Something had grown between us. I turned back to him and reached for his hand. I wasn't used to this yet, this permission to touch. His skin was so warm, real. Here. "Unbelievable," I whispered. He grinned and pulled me toward him, but at that exact moment, Diane entered the kitchen. Malachi let go of me and stepped back, clearing his throat. "I hope you like pasta," she said to him. Her tone was light, but she shot him a look. He'd been warned. "I suspect I will love anything you cook," he replied. I had no doubt that was true. Malachi hadn't eaten a decent meal since well before his death, sometime in the early 1940s. Malachi and I set the table while Raphael poured us each a glass of lemonade. Dinner had been Diane's idea. She had insisted on meeting both Malachi and his people before she would allow me to go out with him. She kept narrowing her eyes, like she was wondering if he'd come armed. I was wondering the same thing, and while I'd seen Malachi kill Mazikin with deadly accuracy and powerful grace, I'd rarely seen him do anything as mundane as setting forks on a table. By the way he watched his own hands and carefully placed each piece of cutlery, he was probably thinking about it as well. I was dying to ask him what was going on inside his head, to finally get to know the real him better. Maybe there would be time for